Hi there and welcome along to our first weekly catch-up. My name's Ian Crawford. I'm a professional speaker, trainer and coach in the area of leadership and influence. On the other screen, is my friend and colleague, Ash Ludi, also professional speaker, trainer and coach in the area of leadership. How's things going, Ash?
Good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, really good. Crazy times out there.
Absolutely. I'm glad that we actually finally got to this stage, that these crazy times have actually created a little bit of space for us to finally take this opportunity to share a bit of our knowledge and our experience of, what has it been? I think between us, we worked out about nearly 40 years worth of experience of working with leaders and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
So I think this just gives us a good opportunity to be able to share some of those insights about what we see these good leaders do.
And we've been talking about this for a while, haven't we?
It is time for us to step up. That's true.
So give an idea to our listeners about how we've got here and a quick overview about what we're trying to attempt to achieve during our catch-ups.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, as I sort of mentioned briefly a minute ago, the idea really is, I think between you and I, we worked out the other day that we've got about, I think, nearly 40 years worth of experience, right? And that's working with some of the, most diverse and interesting leaders around. That could be from small one-on-one situations, and smaller local businesses right through to global companies. And so we just wanted to take the time to share some of these experiences and observations around what we see really good leaders do, and hopefully take that opportunity to start the conversation, share that information, and see where we can sort of push it and help people.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been really observing in this time of craziness is that the good leaders are stepping up really well, but one of the interesting that I'm seeing is that the gaps and the areas of lesser skill in leaderships are really showing up now. In times when it's gone from a face-to-face point of view to a virtual, the gaps in people's leadership skills are really showing up. I don't know if you've observed that as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I think even not only that, we're seeing it on a global scale, right?
Yeah.
So we're seeing it, you and I have had this conversation, we chuckle about it, that you see, even the differences in my world between observing of how someone like a Donald Trump is handling, these crisis situations, and sometimes the arrogance and the just never being wrong piece, combined with, say, someone like a Jacinda Ardern, who has, the depth of compassion in the way that she approaches things, and the results that flow out of that has been really interesting to observe, I think.
I think that last point is really interesting as well. The stark difference in the response to communities around those leaders, and those two aren't the only ones. There's everything in between.
No, absolutely.
But it's been really quite astounding and really interesting to watch around the communities and how they respond to those different leaders. So how about we dive in? So what have you seen effective and impactful leaders doing in this time of change and unknown and ambiguity?
Well, I think for me, there's three key things that I've picked up. So number one for me is, I guess, what I would call this sort of putting people first. Right? I think I was reading a McKinsey report the other day, and they were talking about the importance of driving empathy. And it's that idea that, in particular in times of crisis, that empathy is really that number one focus, because really as leaders, what are we all about? We're all about the people that we lead, whether it's the teams, the communities, the organizations. It's about the people that we lead. And so taking the time to ensure that we're putting people first is a really critical thing that I've been seeing that the really good leaders have done. So whether that's, in the world of virtual interactions with, this virus, of making sure that they're checking in regularly around that, how they communicate messages, things like that, have all been very people focused. How do I take care of my people first? While then, how do I then deal with, all the other stuff that's going on around it? So that's been a really big piece for me. Have you seen anything around that side?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And that probably sounds really easier for us to understand and willing to do, but there's a lot of people in our world that would find that a real struggle. Their focus is usually
Yeah.
on task delivery, and now suddenly, people are really struggling, and they need to reach out for that. And I think just to add something to what you were saying is, that empathy to the teams and understanding what the teams are going through. I think one of the really important steps before that is that the leader has real empathy for themselves, that they understand that, as leaders, they're going through tough times as well. They're human. And I think sometimes that global expectation of what leaders are supposed to be like, they're supposed to be calm and relaxed and full of confidence during these times. That's what they're displaying, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's how they're feeling. And I think it's really important that one of the first steps is that leaders understand that they're going to feel overwhelmed, angry, frustrated, all with their response to the unknown. And if they can understand that themselves to start off with and put strategies in place to reduce that in themselves before stepping out, I think that is going to also help in regards to understanding other people and also dealing with other people. You have to manage yourself first.
Yeah. So what's one of the key things that you see leaders do to do that?
Yeah, well, it comes down to emotional intelligence, and that first step of emotional intelligence, self-awareness, is just stopping and going, you know what, I'm actually really struggling as well. And once we're aware of that, we can actually then modify and manage that and put strategies in place. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to go away completely, but understand that, yes, I'm feeling this way and I've got to be aware of that. I need to put strategies in place, and that could be exercise to self-awareness activity, mindful, whatever you'd like to do. And maybe we can talk about that as in one of our future sessions. But I think it's, we get this real strong belief that leaders, they have to be, stoic and really good at this and be able to move forward, and not really fully aware that they're humans first.
Well, and I think that sort of taps into the concept of vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
That idea of making sure that I think you can be both, you can be vulnerable and you can be stoic, right?
Yeah.
And often I think, the two can be run almost in parallels. You can take that time to share some of the challenges that you're going through, but then also switch into how do we move forward from here, right, in that piece.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think that's 100%. And again, easy for us to talk about, but a lot of leaders can really struggle. Human beings can really struggle with that concept.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, these are the conversations we often have with leaders in the good times, right? Is that there's a difference between knowing what to do and doing what you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And those two things, especially under times of crisis, it's something that I had a really interesting conversation with a GM at one of Australia's best coffee companies a few weeks ago, and they had actually been investing a lot of time into their leaders over the last sort of 12 months. And what was interesting is he described exactly that. He said it wasn't so much how they responded at this time, it was the time that they'd invested in, say, the 12 to 18 months leading up to it, that meant when the time came, their leaders stepped up even further than their expectations, right? That their ability to deal with these things was from the time invested, not just figuring out, okay, well, how do we best deal with things at the time? So I thought that was pretty insightful for them.
I think that's really great. I think also just the other thing is that from a leadership point of view, and linking onto the empathy thing that you're saying, is one of the really cool things I think leaders can do in this time is actually tell people that they're aware that this is a challenging times. And regularly say, hey, I know that this is tough. I know being at home, and I know that the things that you're trying to deal with and balance in regards to your work is tough. And I think that does two things. The first one, it highlights that empathy. It highlights that the leader understands the situation. And secondly, by a leader saying that, I think it also highlights and sends the very covert message that it's okay to talk about, that this is a time of difficulty, and it's okay to talk about it, and let's talk about it and let's help each other out.
You're absolutely right. I mean, that sort of does extend into, I guess segues nicely into one of the other points that that I've observed is that idea around that communication piece, and in particular, that communication is key, right?
Yeah.
So, and that to me ties back into exactly what you're talking about, being able to share with them individual experiences, and in particular that empathy or that understanding, but also then it allows them to moderate how they engage with that, because I think you raised a really important piece there when you were describing that, is that virtual is not the same as in the real world, right?
No.
And
exactly.
so you do need to be very mindful of how that communication takes place, because it's not the same interactions, and you can't just copy and paste from what we do in the office to same structure, same formats and things like that out of that. So I think your idea there is very switched on.
So you mentioned effectively communicating there. Have you got any more tips that you yourself know, but also have seen other leaders do?
Yeah, I think for me, number one is they're really good at focusing on transparency. So they are really good at talking about the stuff that they do know and also the stuff that they don't know, which, funnily enough, if I contrast it, a lot of leaders that I've worked with are actually quite nervous about talking about the stuff that they don't know.
Yeah.
Whereas people are not stupid, right? They know that things are changing instantaneously, and we've noticed in the last few weeks that things are changing almost hour by hour, if not day by day. So I think being transparent and open around the fact that, here's the stuff that we know, here's the stuff that we don't know, and we will then support that by keeping you regularly updated. Right? So number one, I think being transparent. Number two, making sure there's a sound frequency around it so that people get to see that we are changing, we are adjusting to the changing circumstances. So I think that's a really important piece. And the other thing I would say is be mindful of the fact that people's bandwidth is normally pretty stretched during these times. So again, be really mindful of the mode that they use, right? So the type of communication method. So as we just mentioned, virtual isn't the same as face-to-face. And so you can't just say transfer a face-to-face meeting into a virtual meeting and use the same rules and understandings and things like that. It just doesn't seem to work as effectively. We do need to really take the time to reset or re-clarify the purpose of the interactions. So one of the initial responses that you'll tend to see is people have a natural tendency to increase their frequencies of meetings and communications and things like that. Whereas I would say a better approach is be far more effective with your communication than just increasing the frequency of them, because then people's bandwidth just gets soaked up even further.
Yeah, I think they're really great points, and you're absolutely spot on there. And we know, this is the world that we work in, and we know that even in the best of times, communication is a challenge, and for a 1,000 different reasons. So I think one of the things that leaders really need to do in this time, where people are filtering information through fear and anxiety and not knowing, is being really, making sure they're just absolutely crystal clear and having really high levels of clarity in regards to when they deliver their message. And we've seen it, if leaders aren't clear and concise, or they put sarcastic tones on their messages, because people are really quite scared and don't know what's happening into the future. We've seen really strongly about how people respond to that. And the message could be strong, the message could be clear, but the way that it's been delivered, and the tone and the pace and, like I said, sarcasm, the response is going to be very, very different. And once again, I think that your ability to communicate well is really shown up in times where people are filtering it through fear and anxiety. And if you're good at it, it will show up. If you're not, it will display itself as well. And that's okay, But as leaders, we just go, "Ooh, that didn't work. Let's try that again,"
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not go
Well,
on to the defensive.
sorry, mate. And I think that taps back into your earlier point about leaders themselves being, I guess, having that self-awareness. Because I think with that aspect of self-awareness, it allows you to moderate and deal with those responses much quicker, which then allows you to then switch your mindset into being task-focused and people-focused, to then be more effective in those communications as well. But if you don't have that ability to sort of tap in and know where your emotions are sitting, then it's much easier for that to drip in, as you said.
Absolutely. And again, easy to say, it can be a challenge to do, and it's a pretty high order skill, but it's just a learned skill as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
One of the other things that I've seen leaders do in this particular time, because we have changed in regards to possibly where we're actually sitting and how we deliver work from a virtual setting, is about them really regularly and clearly revisiting the cultural guidelines in regards to people's behaviours, what's expected within the team, and having open conversations about behaviours that are worthwhile and effective and behaviours that are displayed that aren't. And I think that's a really important thing to do in this time, because people feel secure with guidelines. Knowing their boundaries in regards to where they should and shouldn't act, people feel secure in that. And the research is pretty strong around that. And secondly, if as a leader, my people start stepping outside those boundaries of expected values and behaviours, if we had conversations about it, and if we really clearly define what they are, having those conversations about them stepping outside them becomes a lot easier.
No, I was just going to ask you, mate. So do you think that the value is redefining those during these crisis times, or is that something that you would have seen that it's kind of work that's already been done, and this is where I guess that previous work would shine through?
Yeah, well, I think the term there is to revisit. I would suggest that if you've got good teams, good teams have discussions around this. And it's not necessarily set by the leader. They have conversations about this. And as a team, they agree on appropriate behaviours, which links into values around how we deliver our work. But in times of change and unknown, we need to revisit and ensure that people are clear that, hey, it's not okay to do X and it's not okay to do B. We're going to be honest with each other. We're going to be transparent. We're going to support each other. Anything outside that, as a leader and as a team, we're going to hold people accountable for not doing stuff. And so is there anything else, other tip that you have for people listening?
Probably the last one that I guess springs to top of mind for me is, I guess, this ability to make decisions, and in particular making decisions in uncertainty or with incomplete information. And so for me, what I see is the really good leaders tend to have their, I guess for want of a better word, their decision-making frameworks that they use, where they allow, they create time to pause, to stop and to assess the information that they receive, right? They basically take some time to look at, running their different scenarios or alternatives, picking their best one, and then making a best case approach or best case decision, right? Whereas if I sort of re-engineer that and go that the opposite way, sometimes I see leaders getting stuck in waiting for complete information, right? And that not forces, but it actually results in them being very slow to move with things. And as you've seen, I mean, so just our experiences here in Australia in the last 5 weeks, plane flying all over the countryside, doing work with a handful of different clients, and now haven't left my office, for for about the last 4 weeks. So it's amazing how quickly it can all change. And if you are sitting on your decisions and not moving quickly, not only do teams get become concerned around that because it becomes very stagnant for them, but obviously organisations actually become at risk if they don't tend to move. So I think what I've seen the really good leaders tend to do is they have their framework, but they're comfortable working with incomplete information and understanding that it's an iteration process. So we make the best decision for now or today, knowing that potentially we might have to adjust things or tweak things tomorrow. And having said that, that is actually pretty fatiguing for leaders, right? That requires a whole pile of energy and reserve to be continually taking in information, refining it, adjusting the strategy, and then moving forward with the next piece. It's not an easy piece. So it's, again, like you mentioned before, it sounds simple. Have a basic framework that you work on, be comfortable working with incomplete information, refine your strategy as you go along. But it is not as easy. We like certainty as leaders.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to think, well, I've got to get all the information. I have to get everything in place. Although the underpinning piece, I would say, that is the really good leaders that I see tend to have very sound sources of information, right? So they are very good at filtering out a lot of the noise and making sure that they either go and seek out the correct information. So in this situation, if we look at, say, the COVID crisis, it would be ensuring that they're only extracting information from, government websites and things like that, to then be able to make strategic decisions. Not our beloved Facebook or, those kind of trusted sources of information.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And I think you actually said this to me a while ago, is that leaders not making a decision is a decision. And
absolutely,
that really holds things up from a production point of view and a delivery point of view, but also I don't think it sets the culture that a lot of leaders are looking for. And I think one of the things that leaders need to be aware of is they have to be okay with being wrong sometimes. And if they make if they make a decision based on the information they have at the time, reliable information they have at the time, and they make the decision and it's wrong, they should feel comfortable. I'll learn next time, I'll do it better next time, but I need to move on and not beat themselves up about it, because it's the only thing that they can do. And not making that decision can be, high risk. And again, we've seen examples at a global scale where we've put the decision on making decisions around this coronavirus, and the impact has been catastrophic. People have lost their lives, rather than just going, based on, well, hang on, I've got all the information I have now, whether people like it or not, whether it's wrong or right, I'm going to make a decision based on the information from experts, from non-Facebook places, and I'll make the decision and then just ride that wave. And like you said, tweak it as you go along. And one of the things that I'll just add, and we're moving to the end of our very first session now, is I think one of the things around making those decisions in times of uncertainty and crisis and ambiguity is for leaders to be seen more often. And that doesn't...
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because, as a leader, we sit in our office, we sit in our space, and we gather all this information, and we might spend hours, days, weeks making that decision, and we feel comfortable with that decision. We walk out into a workplace and go, bang, there's a decision. Not understanding that it's going to take a while for people, get to the place where I've made the decision, I've had all the information, but you haven't, team. And understand that I'm going to have to support you to get to you the confidence level that I am. And that can range from personal check-ins on a one-on-one basis, or opening up webinars for no other reason, just to have conversations around it. Getting people to send questions in, and then doing a video once a week that answers all the questions. One of the best tips that I saw, one of my best leaders that I saw, is a guy called Ron Alexander here in Perth. People from Australia would know that name, well known in the sports industry, well known as an elite athlete in his time. And he did a major change in an organisation that I was employed in. And when he did that change, he sat at the front of the room and said, right, what questions do you have of me about that change? And for the next 2 hours, he was smashed with questions until the group ran out of questions. And simply by doing that, that installed such confidence in the group about, like you said earlier, transparent and answered. Now, some of the answers were, I do not know. And I'll get back to you when I do, but he was there. And I think having that opportunity in these times for people to vent, to ask questions is a really powerful strategy in regards to supporting your people and putting your people first.
And think about, there's often a lot of talk around utilising or engaging your teams as part of decision making. How do you think is that a viable scenario in times of crisis?
So I missed that question. What was it?
Is it a viable situation in times of crisis when things are moving fast?
As in being seen more often?
As in engaging your teams in the decision making process?
Oh, absolutely. Because again, leaders, a lot of times the leaders aren't the content experts. It's the team as a collective. And when I say this to groups, leaders get all nervous about, well, hang on, it's my decision. Well, hang on, yeah, it is your decision. But gathering information, having conversations with your team gives you better positioning and better information and boundaries to make that decision. You get the final say, you're the leader. But bringing people in and gathering information and getting them to have a say, I think is, from 1,000 different reasons, is an incredibly powerful strategy, ranging from you'll make better decisions through to massive trust within your team. And thirdly, is getting people ownership of decisions moving forward. And if they own decisions, they run with them and they work harder on them.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Is there anything else you want to add, Ash, before we wind this first session up?
Actually, no, nothing else I want to add in at that point. Changed my mind. I thought, actually, hang on. No, I think Croft's ended that in a pretty good spot. I'm going to stop
Thank you. Thanks, Ash. So we have decided that we're going to do this once a week and continue this, for one, because I think this is great for us in our learning, and something that we've seen as a strength of the two of us, where we've been fortunate enough to present together, is that we have different points of view and different styles, which I think is an important thing to investigate when we talk about leaders, and an opportunity for both of us to grow with each other. And we've both got slightly different bents and focuses on the way that we approach leadership. So I say to the people that are listening as we finish up, if you have a topic or a question that you would like us to address, the contact details are now on the screen. Please feel free to reach out to us and suggest a topic or suggest a question, and we'd be really happy to answer that in the coming weeks. So I'm going to say, first one, done and dusted. Well done, Ash. Thank you very much. I hope you have a great
one. Well done to you. Thanks for carrying me.
I just say, you know, once again, your dress sense is astounding and fantastic. So well done on that as well.
We're going to have to schedule a meeting next week just to make sure we're not wearing the same shirts next time.
I totally agree. So thanks very much, Ash, and we'll see everyone next week.